Very good. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Ted SNYDER. I'm Dean of the GSB. Tonight, as part of the inaugural Chicago Price Theory Conference, we're here to celebrate the successes of the initiative and to honor Gary Becker's contributions to economics. We're very pleased to have a lot of very special people here tonight. Included among them is President Don Randel. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Don for his terrific leadership of the University of Chicago, the most true of all the true. We also wish Don the very best on July 1 when he moves to the presidency of the Mellon Foundation. Don, may I ask you to offer a toast?
I say often to University of Chicago alumni and friends that University of Chicago alumni and friends have something truly profound in common, and the alumni of most other universities have mostly trivial things in common. And what I mean by that is the spirit of this great university and the focus on the intellectual enterprise, the commitment to the academic life, the pursuit of great ideas wherever great ideas lead one. And Gary Becker probably embodies that spirit as well as anybody could. Gary Becker's career, but his daily life, captures for us perfectly, I think, what this university stands for, and in so doing inspires all of us to live to that standard, to pursue great ideas wherever they go, to challenge received opinion, no matter received from whom. And so I ask you now to join me in a toast to Gary Becker for representing for us so perfectly that spirit. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much, Don. The excitement that we share about this initiative is not very hard to understand. After all, the three founding members are Gary Becker, Kevin Murphy, and Steve Levitt. In Steve Levitt's words, Gary is the greatest living economist. As the program indicates, he received the John Bates Clark Medal, Nobel Prize in Economics, the National Medal of Science. Kevin Murphy, who's my colleague in the GSB, he also received the Clark Medal. Last year, he was named a MacArthur Fellow, which means he's a genius. We already knew that. He was cited for attacking seemingly intractable economic questions. Anyone who heard him earlier today knows that that's actually not very hard for Kevin to do. Steve Levitt stepped up to be the director of this initiative, and he's done a superb job executing those responsibilities. Steve also won the Clark Medal, and he wrote Freakonomics, which I will claim to be an extraordinarily successful book. I don't think there's any serious economics book that has reached and sustained as broad an audience as Freakonomics and has turned on so many people to the power of economics. Now, if these three individuals needed any advice, we also have an advisory board, and I wanted to mention that the advisory board consists of George Schultz, Milton Friedman, Ronald Coase, and to bring the average age down, Andre Schleifer and Ted SNYDER. But at a more fundamental level, this initiative and the excitement that we feel about it, I think it derives from a belief that it can address a growing disconnect between much of economics and what we really need from economics, namely insights into important and relevant issues. Indeed, as stated by Gary and Kevin and Steve, the purpose of the initiative is to change the course of economics. That is not a Hail Mary pass for these folks. It is not opening day thoughts or imaginings up north. This is an achievable objective for this group of people. The initiative is on course, it's on target, it's had extraordinary success in attracting new talent to the University of Chicago, and it has the right framework, Chicago price theory. We will resume, I'm not sure if we're on time, but we'll resume whenever dessert is served. Rich Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Ted, and I'm very honored and flattered to be here tonight. And obviously, I'm sharing this podium with some very, very important people, and I feel rather humble about the whole thing. But I wish to add my congratulations to the entire team of economists that comprise the Initiative on Chicago Price Theory, and particularly to Gary Becker, whom we honor here tonight. He's provided the leadership and inspiration for this team. And without him, I don't think we'd have the same team or a team at all. Certainly the wide range of socially relevant studies that we have here, which have been so insightful, we'll be hearing tomorrow. And I think they give testimony to the vitality and quality of this group they speak for themselves. So I support the Initiative on Chicago Price Theory for a number of reasons. First and foremost, as you heard, I am a proud graduate of the University of Chicago back in 1966, 40 years ago, where we received our diploma across the street at Rockefeller Chapel. Additionally, I've always had a strong interest in the marketplace and fascination with price theory. And as we can all agree here, it's the study and exposition of price theory where the University of Chicago has distinguished itself, thanks to an unparalleled legacy of globally recognized economists, including Dr. Becker. My knowledge and respect for this subject could not have been cultivated more deeply anywhere else. Growing up on a farm in downstate Illinois, I was always fascinated by the commodity futures markets and how they worked, how they incentivized production and consumption, or sometimes when prices were constrained from doing so. As you heard from Ted, my love for the agricultural sector continued earlier on with positions in Armour and Company, the meat packer, the Chicago Board of Trade, Commodity Exchange here in Chicago, and finally with DeKalb Genetics, as I retired from Monsanto 4 years ago. I was fortunate to have a career in agriculture at a time and place that provided me the opportunity to observe firsthand how the price incentive system could work and for the benefit of society. I witnessed some of the first newly freed farmers markets in China during a visit in Shanghai in 1984. This ushered in a great resurgence of ag productivity and eventually improved the life for millions. Later in my work, I saw how free market openings in Eastern Europe and market liberalizations in Mexico and South America produced similar results. But perhaps most heartwarming to me as a former GI was what I observed in Vietnam over the course of several visits. After socialist measures reduced the country's population to near starvation, the Vietnam government in the 1980s reintroduced into the food chain the price incentive system together with some limited property rights. In remarkably short order, the country regained its status as a leading rice exporter and an important producer of corn as well, something it hadn't done before, and that's where my business fit in. So imagine my surprise in 1994 when I visited in North Vietnam, not too far from Hanoi, and I observed farmers and grain merchants with their cell phones checking Chicago prices as they made their spring planting decisions. The relative prosperity in rural Vietnam that has occurred over the past 15 years is truly remarkable. And we were reminded of that last year during a visit. So in all of these places, a freer and more informed market has facilitated adoption of the newest technologies to further enhance productivity. Again, this is where our business comes in. Seeing for myself the economic and social benefits that have been generated where agricultural markets have been allowed to work has provided me some of the most satisfying experiences in my career. So it's with this background that I'm delighted to provide a stimulus to help assure that innovative research into the price system can be continued here at the University of Chicago and can add further to the scholarship and the development scholarship and economic education. As an agriculture, which I have personally witnessed, the benefits of this kind of research can be enormous. This is why I support the initiative on Chicago price theory and why I have chosen this vehicle as my way of giving back to the university what the University of Chicago and our predecessor benefactors have made possible for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rich. Back in 2004 in the fall, we all wanted this initiative to become a permanent university-wide center. We also had a name for the center in mind. And now with the generous support of so many donors, and as I mentioned earlier, the support of the provost, the support of the Social Sciences Division, the support of the GSB, I'm pleased to announce that effective July 1, 2006, the Initiative on Chicago Price Theory will be renamed the Becker Center on Price Theory, founded by Rich O'Ryan. Thank you. Thank you, Rich. Congratulations, Gary. It's really great. I hasten to add that we're not done raising funds. We're indeed counting on many others to join in to ensure the future successes of the Becker Center. Literally, in that regard, when I was working on my remarks today, I got out my own checkbook. I checked with my wife and wrote out a check for my first payment on my pledge from myself and Kim. So here it is. I don't know where I'm supposed to give it. Caroline's over there, so I'm supposed to give it to Caroline. So I'll do that after I get done. But now we have the perfect moment with the naming of the Becker Center to honor Gary and celebrate an extraordinary life. I want to start with two very brief comments, and then we'll have some terrific people to follow. First, my own very simple observation. Economics, but for Gary Becker, would be a much less exciting discipline, less relevant, and much more narrow. Second, as a student at Chicago, I had just great fortune to take classes from many superb teachers, including Milton Friedman, George Stigler, Bill Landis, Dennis Carlton, Sam Peltzman, my thesis advisor, Ed Lazier, who's here. And it was great fortune, but Gary Becker was the best teacher I ever had. And I'm very personally grateful to his role in my professional development. So we're going to hear from four people, and I'm sure we also then want to hear from Gary. But let me introduce the order of speakers at this point. First, we're going to hear from Gidi Nishat Becker, Gary's wife, Associate Professor of History at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Then we'll hear from Judge Richard A. Posner, United States Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and Senior Lecturer at the University of Chicago Law School. Then from Stephen Stigler, the Ernest DeWitt Burton Distinguished Service Professor and Chairman, Department of Statistics and the College. And fourth, from Kevin Murphy, the George Stigler Distinguished Service Professor of Economics here at the GSB. Gidi, welcome.
I'd like to start out by thanking Ted for the first check he has donated to the Becker Center. So we should keep that and maybe frame it, Ted. So, I have been, now here's my brief talk. I've been told repeatedly by our honoree, Gary Becker, that as a Barnard girl, I do not have a sense of humor. So don't expect any amusing anecdotes. I'm also not an economist. Therefore, I won't say anything about his work. But being a historian and his wife gives me a unique perspective on the man. So I will share with you a few vignettes that you may not get from his work. I will start at the beginning. This is how I met Gary. It was early October. I had just returned from a research trip to Iran, and I was scheduled to take my PhD exam in December. I had rented an unfurnished apartment and needed to get enough furniture in less than a week so I could prepare myself for the big event. I was truly stressed out. A good place to start out was to look through the maroon. I saw an ad for a table with 10 chairs for only $200. Oh, my second page, sorry. Oh, here it is, okay. I called immediately and went over to take a look. The housekeeper showed me the set, which was in excellent condition, but I was disappointed to see it was modern and made of teak. I called the owner later that evening. In our brief exchange over the phone, I learned that he was an economics professor. My heart sank, since I was hoping to do some bargaining about the price, because I knew I would try to get rid of it when I had more time in the future. I was also short of cash. This is how the conversation went. Me, Professor Becker, I have seen this set. It's in excellent condition, but I'm wondering if I could have it for less. Becker, no, you can't. It's in very good condition, and I paid much more for it. Me, well, I do not like modern furniture, and I will have to resell it later. Becker, you don't have to buy it. Go find something you like. Me, Mr. Becker, I don't have time to look. I have to take my PhD exam in less than 2 months. Becker, that's not my problem. Me, I have just come back from a long trip, and I'm not sure how much money I have. Becker, I don't have time to listen to your problems. Someone else is interested in the table, so if you don't want it, I will let him have it. Me, okay, I'll take it. But can I get it next week? Becker, no, you have to take it right away. I have bought a new table, and I don't have room for this one. If you don't pick it up by tomorrow, I will let the other person have it. Me, I really can't pay you until next week. Becker, that's fine, pay me later. I began to wonder about what kind of economist this Becker was. He did not know who I was, and he was not willing to come down on the price, but he would let me have it without getting paid for it. Since I needed a table and chairs anyway, I arranged to have it picked up the next day. I related the story to my good friend Marilyn. She said promptly, "What else can you expect from a Chicago economist? They're all fascists." The following week, I went to the professor's office to pay him. Contrary to the way he sounded on the phone, he seemed quite genial. I asked how come he wouldn't come down on the price, but he trusted me with the table before paying for it. He said, "I didn't care about getting the money, but I did not want to sell it way below what it was worth." What surprised me even more was he asked me to dinner. I told him I could not go out for another 2 months with my exams. He suggested a day in December. I did not hear from him until the day we were supposed to go out. I was surprised to see Gary when the bell rang that evening, since I wasn't sure he would show up. We went to a French restaurant, And during the dinner, I harangued him about the terrible political system in this country, the plight of the poor who are being exploited by the rich, and similar subjects. He did not say much, but he looked as if he was listening seriously, and even nodded a few times, as if he agreed with me. The next day, when Marilyn asked me how the dinner went, I told her proudly that I had almost managed to enlighten that fascist. Little did I know that I would end up being enlightened. My friend Marilyn, who had also had an epiphany of sorts about Gary and other Chicago economists. It happened one evening when I gave a big party to celebrate her getting her first teaching job. The next day, Marilyn told me she was sorry she did not meet my friend. She was now calling him my friend instead of the fascist because she knew I had started going out with him. I said to her, "You were talking with him all evening." She said she was taken aback and said, "I thought Gary Becker is an economist. That man was fascinating. He talked about marriage, divorce, and all kinds of interesting things." Marilyn's and my initial reaction were the overwhelming sentiments towards the Chicago school ideas, even in the 70s. But as I learned more about these views, I discovered my ignorance about what Gary and his fellow economists at the Chicago school were striving for. I was not the only one mistaken about what Gary was about. I learned that his opinion about me was also skewed. At one point, much later, I asked him what he thought of me when he met me first. He said he thought I was a naive airhead. I was shocked and asked him if that was the case, why did he go out with me? He said he thought there was some room improvement. By this time, I knew that Gary, unlike our hero, Milton Friedman, is not a missionary type. Although my early impression of Gary as a mean economist has undergone radical change, I know that he conveys an air of meanness. Fortunately, I no longer get exposed to it since it comes out only on the tennis court and in the classroom. He plays tennis usually to win. He is so determined that he managed to beat partners who are much better than him in the sports. Several of his former tennis partners gave up the game in frustration after playing with him for a while. One of them told him, "Gary, you're a worse winner than loser." But he gave up the game anyway. Let me add, for the benefit of those who may be present today, that they can get back at him. He has a losing streak these days. In the classroom, however, he appears stern and even ferocious to this day. I have never taken a course with him, but I have heard students describe him like that. I used to attend an economics history workshop run by David Gellinson. I don't know if he's here or not. Once I joined David along with his students for a drink at the Quad Club. When David introduced me, he mentioned I was Gary Becker's wife. One of the students looked almost shocked. He turned to me and said, "I didn't know Becker is married." I said, "Why not?" He said, "He looks so serious and harsh. How can you live with him? Does he do anything normal? Does he say anything that doesn't have to do with economics?" I tried to explain to him that privately, Becker was a very caring and easygoing person, and he was fun to be with, at least sometimes. I'm not sure I convinced him. Gary has been a wonderful partner, stimulating companion, and generous with me to a fault. But the best gift I have received from him is becoming, by extension, a part of the Chicago School of Economics. And let me tell you why. In my undergraduate days, when I learned about classical Greece, I was so fascinated by the atmosphere that existed there, I toyed with the idea of majoring in philosophy. I feel that my association with the individuals who have made up the Chicago School in the past, and many of those who are continuing this tradition in the present, has realized my wish. As a historian, I think that the enormous contributions the Chicago School has made to our world is equal, maybe even surpasses, the debt we owe to the ancient philosophers. The members of the School of Athens improve the heritage of the past. The members of the Chicago School of Economics have also used the foundation laid down by Adam Smith to chart new ways of examining many facets of how individuals and societies function. In addition, they have come up not merely with intellectual ideas and theorems, but concrete and novel solutions to improve both. George Stigler, one of the extraordinary members of the Chicago School and a dear friend, used to tell me that historians spend 10 minutes clearing their throat. I will not task your patience and will not emulate my colleagues. But in closing, I would like to express my deep gratitude to those responsible for today's event and the programs associated with it in the future. I believe that the homage that's being paid to Gary is not for him alone, but also to the giants on whose shoulders he stands. Thanks to men like Theodore Schultz, George Stigler, Milton Friedman, and many who are at present advancing the brave and revolutionary vision and ideas of this school, we live in a more democratic and better world. I'm also heartened that the contributions of these exceptional individuals have become widely accepted throughout the world, and today they are considered heroes and no longer villains as they were in the past. As for me, I am glad that in that stressful week in 1973, I needed to buy a table, and that Gary had decided to get rid of one. Thank you.
Gary and Edie and friends and distinguished guests. On a rather similar occasion, 11 years ago, I remarked on how Gary, who was then a mere stripling of 65, had managed to remain unabatedly creative and productive in a field that, because it's rapidly changing, highly theoretical, and increasingly mathematized, ought to be the exclusive preserve of the young. Well, 11 years later, the wonder grows because he's still unabatedly creative and productive. I don't know how he does it, though I suppose it helps to be brilliant and self-disciplined and to age slowly. On that occasion, back in 1995, I emphasized another factor. It had been suggested by a remark that Gary had made. It was that if he had a choice between theory and data, the theory pointed in one direction and the data pointed in the opposite direction, he would go with the theory and trust that the data eventually would be found to conform to it. That may sound stubborn. It is stubborn. But judging from the success of Gary's career, it is rational stubbornness. So I'll now propound, in the spirit of Becker, an economic theory of rational stubbornness. It is that his stubbornness is rational because for an outstanding person, the expected benefits of persistence in a bold and unpopular course of research may exceed, as they would not for an ordinary intellect, the cost of ridicule and the risk of failure. That actually completes the theoretical part of my talk. But seriously, it's Gary's unflinching resolve to follow rational choice theory wherever it may lead, and if necessary, to invite skepticism and even a degree of ridicule by his persistence that marks him as a very serious theorist. He's invested a lifetime in rational choice theory and is not about to give it up. It is through the clash of the stubborn theorists that science, including economics, advances. Eventually, at least this is the scientific faith, the data will arbitrate between competing theories and will give the palm to the theory with the most predictive and explanatory power. The theorist who abandons the theory at the first sign of trouble or yields to ridicule and skepticism because he's stepping off the accustomed path is failing to compete vigorously in the marketplace of ideas. We expect the young person to have the fresh ideas. The young person doesn't have a stake in the conventional wisdom of the field. He hasn't yet been completely acculturated to its way of looking at things. He brings a new perspective. But he'll find himself under great pressure from his elders, who have the power to grant or deny tenure and other career benefits to conform to the existing practices and assumptions of the field. It takes tenacity, persistence, intellectual courage, and a great deal of self-confidence to resist this pressure to conform. And Gary has displayed these qualities for more than a half century of economic research, and he shows no signs of flagging. Oh, speaking of self-confidence, maybe you saw the article in the New York Times yesterday, which reports a study by two economists, which finds a positive correlation between self-confidence and physical beauty of both men and women. So the issue then is how large a factor you think this has played in Gary's success. So this is the empirical aspect of my talk. Now, we all have a tendency to take for granted, to regard as obvious and therefore old hat, ideas that were genuine discoveries when they were first propounded. And to counter that tendency, I'll mention an anecdote that Becker told in a book of interviews about the reception of his first paper on fertility in the late 1950s. And quoting Gary, "At the conference where I gave my first paper on population, I said I was treating children as durable consumer goods. There was laughter in the audience. The laughter came as much from the economists as from the sociologists and the demographers. So here's an illustration of the adage that he who laughs last laughs best. I've known Gary for 37 years. We met, probably doesn't remember this, in January 19, you always remember the older people you met, and they don't remember the younger people. So we met in January 1969, after the presidential election, but before the inauguration, at a dinner in New York for members of President-elect Nixon's academic task forces. And when Gary joined the U of C faculty a few years later, first as a visitor, we became friends. You know, my field, obviously, is economic analysis of law, which is the application of rational choice theory to the law. And much of the behavior that the law regulates is non-market behavior. So it was natural that I would sit at the feet of the leading economist of non-market behavior and learn a great deal that I could use in my work, which has been true for the last 30-odd years. Our professional collaboration has deepened in recent years. Gary asked me, and I agreed to co-host with him the Rational Choice Workshop. And I've been doing that for several years, though very much as a junior partner in this enterprise. And it's a continuing source of amazement to me how Gary is able to dominate these sessions with his comments and questions, even when the subject matter seems remote from his interests, as it often is, because our speakers include philosophers, anthropologists, neuroscientists, and political scientists, as well as economists. And speaking of philosophers, despite what Gidi said, Gary doesn't like philosophers. Now, in addition, for the last 14 months, Gary and I have been writing the Becker-Posner blog. The idea for the blog was Gary's, and it's in part a successor to his 18-year production of monthly columns for Business Week. Only now, the columns are weekly, though they're all as long as and often longer than his columns for Business Week, which were strictly word limited. We alternate the choice of topics and the lead postings, and we try to respond to the comments that we receive. We receive quite a lot of comments. So Gary has he in effect celebrates his arrival at the age of 75 by increasing his activity as a public intellectual. Incidentally, we have a high rate of agreement in the positions we've taken in our blog, except when Gary advocates term limits for federal judges, and when I advocate the abolition of academic tenure. But I'd be seriously remiss if I failed to focus in these remarks on Gary's contributions to his scholarly contributions, economic analysis of law, and of course his contributions to labor economics in a broad sense that includes human capital investments in the family and fertility and discrimination, allocation of time, and so on, are well known, as well as his important work on the economics of the political process, on addiction, and on social influences on individual behavior. But his contributions to economic analysis of law are not as well known as they should be, and they're sort of overshadowed by the contributions of such other recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics as Friedrich Hayek and James Buchanan, George Stigler, and Ronald Coase. And even, I think, within the law and economics movement, Gary's significance for the movement is not fully appreciated. And the reason for this relative neglect is that Gary hasn't written extensively about law as such. His article on crime, 1968, Journal of Political Economy, is the only place, I think, in his extensive body of scholarly writings in which one can find an extended discussion of law. Jeremy Bentham, in the late 18th century, had propounded a brilliant economic theory of crime, but it had been thoroughly forgotten by economists. Though in a diluted form, it remained influential through the centuries in criminology and criminal law. But Gary performed a very important service for economic analysis of law by his rediscovery or reinvention of the economic theory of crime and punishment. In his article, which went beyond Bentham, as one would expect, given 150 years of progress in economics. But since I mentioned Ronald Coase, I'll add, Ronald Coase believes that economics has made no progress since Adam Smith. And that, of course, would increase the originality of Gary's rediscovery. But in any event, his article gave rise not only to a considerable empirical literature on deterrence by Isaac Ehrlich and others, which challenged and ultimately changed the sociological and criminological consensus on deterrence. It also led to a theoretical literature that refines and extends his original model of crime and punishment by bringing in considerations such as risk aversion and risk preference. It led to a literature on criminal procedure to which Bill Landis and Frank Easterbrook, who are here, have contributed, to papers by Steve Chevelle and by me on the economic structure of criminal law, and even to the decision of the Federal Sentencing Commission, the late 1980s, to emphasize fines in the punishment of white-collar criminals. Guido Calabresi and Douglas Melamed in the early 70s wrote a celebrated paper in economic analysis of law on property rights and liability rules. And what isn't widely known is this paper was actually written as a reaction to Gary's paper on crime, remote as crime might seem from property rights. Gary's article had seemed to imply that if the probability of apprehension and conviction for a crime were 1, then the optimal fine for theft would simply be the value of the good taken. But of course, the implication of that would be that people would be indifferent between stealing and buying the things they want. They steal something and say, well, go to court and they'll estimate the value of the good and I'll pay you for it. So what Calabresi and Melliman explained was that the whole point of property, or a point of property rights, is to compel voluntary transacting where transaction costs are low, rather than letting a person who thinks he can use some resource more efficiently than someone else simply to take it and leave to the courts the decision in whose hands the resource is more valuable, because that would just displace too much market activity into the courts. So as an example of a single article by Gary having a ramifying influence on a whole variety of literatures spreading widely from their original source. But his significance for the economic analysis of law goes far beyond the crime article and the literature that it generated. And not merely in the general sense that the economics of non-market activities is fundamental to economic analysis of law, because so much of law is concerned with regulating those activities, but his work on human capital, and as an offshoot of that work on employee compensation, opened up the fields of employment and pension law, which are areas of great importance to law, opened them to economic analysis. And his work on the economics of racial discrimination did the same for discrimination law, and his work on the economics of the family for family law. These are all now thriving subfields of economic analysis of law. And Gary doesn't even know how many radical feminists and lesbians writing about family law think his approach is terrific and are using and believe, commodification of family relations is the way to go. I'll give just a few more illustrations. Gary's first book, the one on the economics of racial discrimination, 1957, has given rise to a literature on the economics of federal employment discrimination law, which is a very important part of federal law, affirmative action, and discrimination in services, ranging from the sale of automobiles to the provision of bail bonds. His analysis of no-fault divorce, predicting that it would have only a transitory effect on the divorce rate, has influenced legal discussion of family law. His economic model of the traditional household, which underlies his work on the family, which the wife specializes in household production rather than investing in market human capital, while the husband specializes in market production, has been used to explain how male-female wage differentials, which are often used in litigation as evidence of sex discrimination, can be due simply to decisions by the household on how to allocate the partner's work between household and market. So household production is productive in an economic sense, but it doesn't yield money income. So it looks as if women are being discriminated against. Gary's model of the household is an application of his more general model of the allocation of time and effort in the production of non-market commodities, and the more general model has applications to law as well. I've used his analysis of the economics of effort in my efforts to analyze judicial behavior, trying to understand myself, right? So I'm a judge. His analysis of human capital, and particularly of the distinction between general and firm-specific human capital, has illuminated the economics of employment at will, which is the most common contractual form of employment in the American economy, although I gather not in the French economy. And his analysis of how investments in firm-specific human capital bind employee and employer to each other and can create stable employment relations, even though there's no actual obligation on the employer to continue the employment of the worker or the worker to continue working for the employer, has helped us understand how such a strangely sparse contract could organize economic activity efficiently. Gary wrote a paper in the 70s on private enforcement with George Stigler, and Becker's part of the paper showed how an employer can deter employee malfeasance by backloading the employee's compensation in order to increase the cost of termination to the employee. You have to wait till the end of your employment career to get all your compensation, and that deters you from slacking off as you get toward the end of your career. And this helps us to understand a variety of employment contractual provisions, particularly their pension provisions, which struck lawyers as exploitive. And finally, his more recent work on the economics of drug addiction is beginning to influence academic thinking about the war on drugs, which is a legal war. His influence on economic analysis of law has also a personal dimension. I've mentioned for how much benefit I have derived from his advice and comments and criticisms over the years. But Bill Landis entered the law and economics field in the 60s with his thesis on state employment discrimination laws as Gary's student. And Becker and Gary encouraged Landis's path-breaking article on the economics of the courts, of court procedure, which is the first article to apply economics to legal procedure, at a time when other economists thought Landis was making a career mistake in studying the economics of so non-economic an institution as the judiciary. And it was Becker who first suggested that Landis and I collaborate. Of course, we've written many articles and 2 books together. He suggested that before Bill came to Chicago, and he played a big role in getting him here. He helped solidify my own commitment to law and economics by signing me up as a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. And I still remember, though I doubt that Gary does, very helpful comments that he made, more than 30 years ago when I gave a paper on the economics of negligence at George Stigler's Savage Industrial Organization workshop, where I remember George once calling me up after I'd given a paper and being ripped to shreds, in which he said that another member of the workshop, Reuben Kessel, had told him that he had been unusually brutal and really had to apologize, which he did grudgingly. But I've received constant aid and encouragement from Gary at workshops and other settings ever since, and it's on that personal note that I would like to end. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is a great occasion, and it's a pleasure to be here. 30 years ago, Gary asked me to speak on a similar occasion. It was in honor of my father, and as I told Gary at the time, I was quite intimidated by the prospect because George Stigler had been a household name for as long as I can remember. Now, I'm similarly intimidated on this occasion because Gary Becker has also been a household name to me for almost as long. Now, if you know anything about my household in the 1950s and 60s, that is not necessarily a favorable comment on Gary. There were several household names over that period who were mentioned in less than complimentary ways. My father would refer to them as palookas, a useful term that is not heard often today. It was commonly used in the 1920s to denote a clumsy, stupid person. Most of the palookas are now forgotten, although a few remain in tenured seats at other universities. But Gary's name was always spoken with particular affection and admiration. Indeed, excepting only members of his immediate family, I doubt that Gary has ever had a bigger fan than my father. And I don't only refer to my father's height. Now, the references to Gary that we've heard today, and generally are the ones we heard, were like the ones we heard in our family, invariably favorable. The consequences, though, for we younger members of the family were not always beneficial. Between frequent references to Gary's rotten kid theorem and the testing of the girls we dated against Gary's theory of optimum choice of marriage partner, we learned to be cautious when his name was invoked. We, however, have passed these lessons on to our own children. They know that rotten kid is a technical economic term. Now, this is the University of Chicago, and we are taught here to be skeptical of all assertions. Since we've heard today, and especially this evening, a large number of favorable assertions about Gary, I take it that my role is to be that of the skeptic. There's precedent for this in our family. In 1987, my father introduced Gary's American Economic Association presidential address, and the introduction included an accusation. My father stated, "If this were a hearing for a position on the Supreme Court, I could find only one trifling blemish in a career of high probity. Gary once contemplated, and I emphasize only contemplated, the possibility that consumers could behave non-rationally." My father, of course, was too much a fan of Gary's to let such a damaging accusation linger, and on that occasion he seemed to excuse the transgression, saying, "I plead in extenuation his youth at the time and the temptations one associates with life in New York City." But the charge of irrationality, especially for Gary Becker, is a serious one. It surely demands a more thorough investigation by an even more independent counsel than my father. The rational public, including all in this room, need to know, when did Gary even consider embracing irrationality? What exactly is the crime referred to? Why is Gary being let off on such a flimsy plea? And was it merely a youthful indiscretion? Now, I hereby accept the self-appointed role of a somewhat independent counsel. The offending paper was apparently Gary's article, "Irrational Behavior and Economic Theory," published in our Journal of Political Economy in 1962 while Gary was at Columbia University. In an earlier era, a scholarly investigation of the charge of irrationality would require that I actually read the paper and perhaps one or two subsequent works carefully, weighing the arguments, considering the nuances, checking the references, and maybe even the mathematics. That would take hours, perhaps days or weeks. In this present age, of course, we have better, more efficient ways of proceeding. I refer, of course, to internet research. Accordingly, I have examined the entire corpus of Gary's work, all articles, line by line, word by word, all this in less than a minute. Now, admittedly, there may be some small loss in comprehension by this route, but this loss, I submit, is more than made up for by quantitative precision. Now, after this rigorous and painstaking investigation, I constructed a complex statistical summary to permit us to judge the case. The summary is what I call the irrationality index for Gary. Since this is a quantitatively savvy group, I believe I can briefly explain it to you, despite the lateness of the hour. The irrationality index is computed simply by finding, first, the number of his published papers that at some point in the paper use the word irrational. Divide that by the number of his papers that employ the word rational. Then find the irrationality index by multiplying this ratio by 100 in order to make the number look big. Trust me, I'm a professional. If the resulting irrationality index is over 100, that could be cause for indictment. The results are striking. In Gary's period at Columbia before 1970, his irrationality index was a staggering 125. This means that he was in those days even more focused upon irrationality than on rationality. The charge my father made was not without basis. On the other hand, for papers published subsequent to his return to Chicago in 1970, the index was a meager 15. From 125 to 15. Now pause to think about the implications of this. The University of Chicago's intellectual atmosphere serves as a more effective inoculation against irrationality than any existing vaccines do for influenza. You may compare Gary's irrationality index with those for Dick Posner and George Stigler, both of whose hover in the mid-30s fairly steadily over their careers. There were other findings from this study worth noting. In particular, Gary's use of Keynesian is highly correlated with his use of irrational. And after Gary teamed up with Kevin Murphy, a few new terms show up as alternatives for irrational, such as the technical term ridiculous. Once when Gary was writing for a group at the law school, there was a little backsliding. He softened rational to not absurd. Although as far as I can see, neither Gary nor Kevin has ever used absurd for irrational. Now, the conclusion I draw is that after his return to Chicago, Gary did indeed recant past heresies, and he deserves the pardon my father gave him in 1987. Now, in that same talk in 1987, my father described Gary as, and I have a list here, the premier theorist of human capital, a leader in the revival of the economics of population, the first theorist to deal with time and the creator of the household production function, the leader of the modern theory of crime and deterrence, and more recently of addiction, and last but not least, the founder of a whole new literature of the economic analysis of the family. My father summed up his view in these words: Gary's range and depth of creativity has rarely been matched by any other economist in the history of our discipline. Now, in the 20 years that have passed since that assessment, Gary has gone on to do the equivalent of the life's work of two ordinary good economists and an infinite number of palookas. I am a regular attendee at the Rational Models workshop that Gary helps run, and from what I see, it's clear he's still in mid-career. Gary has been a good friend of our entire family for over half a century. We all share my father's affection for Gary and his pride in Gary's profound and far-reaching accomplishments. It's a pleasure to join in this tribute to this extraordinary man. Thank you, Gary.
Well, you've heard a lot about Gary, and really there's not too much to add beyond what's been said. I'm really here just to say thanks. Thanks for myself, and thanks for the entire economics profession for what Gary has done for all of us. And let me just tell you what we should be thankful for. We should be thankful that Gary saw further than just about any economist in terms of what economics could do. He pushed open new doors into areas that other people probably wouldn't have thought of. I can't think of the number of economists today that are working on problems that Gary started and Gary opened up. We also should be thankful that Gary is tireless, that he doesn't give up, that he pushes economics in every direction he can, that he's continued to work for so long and done such an incredible job. Personally, I'd like to thank Gary for all he's taught me, first as a student, then as a colleague, co-author, somebody to teach with, talk to on basic daily basis about economics. And back when he won the Nobel Prize, I was asked to say a few words, sort of similar to tonight. And at the time I said, the thing about this prize is it was the Economist Prize. And I have empirical evidence for that, which is before Gary won the prize, there's always been a pool of economists that would bet on who would win the prize. And Gary headed up that pool every year. And that's because economists, that's what they thought of him. Because he believed in economics. You knew that when you were in his class. You knew that when you were in the seminar. And when people came in and challenged economics, he didn't throw it under the bus. He took the challenge. And he said, I can use economics to explain that. And he's been confident in that way, and we should be thankful that he was so confident. We should be thankful that he's led us here at Chicago to where we are now with the opening of this Price Theory Center. And we sure hope the Price Theory Center can live up to the tradition. And as a gesture of that gratitude, we have a gift for Gary. These are first editions of Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments. And I would like to say that I've heard Gary speak about Adam Smith's two books, and he always told me he thought Adam Smith Wealth of Nations was great. He didn't think Moral Sentiments was quite as good. But I like this because in a lot of what Gary's done, he did what Smith couldn't. He pushed out the frontiers on the kinds of ideas that Smith touched on in Moral Sentiments. It's really, this is sort of the springboard in some ways for what Gary's done. And he's extended economics in areas that I think people wouldn't have imagined, and he's going to continue to do that. And for that, we should all be grateful. So thank you very much, Gary, and we'd like to present you with this gift. You better be careful, that comes off.
Gary, would you care to say a few words? Thank you.
Well, I won't say much. I am very touched by the two sessions we had today and the presentations, the speakers after dinner. And I'll just thank a few people for a number of different things. Certainly, if one like to thank the people who have helped put the center on better financial footing, Rich Ryan and others who were mentioned. That's a necessary ingredient, and we all appreciate that. I'd like to thank Ted, Steve, and Kevin for all they've done. I mean, they really created the center. I played a minor role, and they were the main, carried the ball, as we would say in football language. And they did all the work, and I really appreciate everything they did to make the center a reality. I'd like to thank all the speakers, Dick Posner, Steve Stigler, Kevin Murphy, for the lies they told about me. I appreciate them. And last but not least, I want to thank Geety, not only for a fine speech and a great wife and companion for all this time. I feel very fortunate we decided to sell that table. But also, she had a dream for a number of years to have a center discussing that will cover these sorts of issues. Perhaps it would have my name on it. And I was reluctant. And in a sense, I'm still reluctant, because I always think of a center when with a name on it is naming after somebody who's either dead or completely retired. And I don't think I'm dead yet. Andy, you can tell me that I think I'm alive still. And I'm not retired. I'm still active. But because of what Ted, Kevin, and Steve wanted, and particularly because of what Geety wanted all these years, I decided, well, I'm not dead and I'm not retired, but I am very flattered to have a center named after me, and I'm sure it's in excellent hands, and it will continue to do great work. Economics will change over time. So when it speaks about the Chicago tradition, this is not a static tradition. This is a changing tradition. I don't know what it will look like in 20 to 30 years. That'll be different, just as it's different now than it was, let's say, when I was a graduate student. And it's very hard to forecast. When people ask me, what are the great problems, I have to talk about that tomorrow. I'm not sure I know what the great problems are. Time will tell what they are. But one thing I think will remain constant, and I hope the center will keep that in mind. Whatever the techniques and mathematical, econometric, I've always been, I studied a lot of statistics and mathematics. I've always been sympathetic to use of technical tools in economics if it can help us illuminate the world. And I think that's the issue. Not how you do it, but what you're doing. And the goal of economics is a science that's judged ultimately by how well it helps us, first of all, understand the world, and if we can, help improve it. And that's what I think is the goal of the center, to use economic analysis as it evolves over time to help us better understand the world and make it a better place to live in. So I thank everybody who came here tonight. I thank everybody who helped create this center. And I thank everybody in particular for naming it after me. Reluctantly but proudly, I'm willing to take that. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Geety, terrific, and Mr. Posner, Steve Stigler, and my colleague Kevin. And Gary, thank you for your remarks. It's really a fun evening, and we have opportunity to talk and have some more wine, but I'm going to close off the official part of the evening right now. For those of you who are going to be here tomorrow, we resume our first session, I believe, is 8:45, and we will have coffee and other things to get started with at 8:15. Thank you all for a terrific evening.